The young and the restless spoilers. Phyllis's eyes fluttered open in the dim light of a cramped, unfamiliar room. The first sensation that hit her was an overwhelming dread, a cold, gnawing fear of darkness and confinement that had plagued her since childhood. Now, trapped in a place so small that even the shadows seemed to close in on her, Phyllis realized with a shuddering clarity that something was horribly amiss. The reality of her situation crashed over her. She had been kidnapped. Her heart pounded against her ribcage as panic coursed through her veins. She struggled against the restraints of terror, her mind racing to piece together the fragments of a nightmare. She'd never encountered a scenario so chaotic, so invasive of her sense of safety. Every instinct screamed at her to escape, to alter her surroundings, to reclaim some semblance of control. Yet, the stifling atmosphere of the room and the encroaching darkness conspired against her, trapping her in a vortex of fear and helplessness. Phyllis's thoughts flickered back to a long line of misfortunes in her life, moments when chaos had reigned supreme, when abuse had left her feeling isolated and vulnerable. Even though she had always been cast as a victim in the relentless dramas of her existence, the isolation of this moment was more than she could bear. Her desperate need for privacy and the assurance of a peaceful life had never been so palpable, so crucial to her survival. As she scanned the confines of the room, every creak of the old structure, every whisper of the wind against the barred window, amplified her terror. It was as if the very fabric of her past, replete with tumult and strife, was converging to trap her once more. Elsewhere, Nick raced through the labyrinthine corridors of the sprawling estate where the kidnapping had taken place. With a mix of determination and fear, he clutched a small envelope containing vital data, the only lead that could pinpoint Phyllis's location. The enigmatic information within had been provided by the very person responsible for orchestrating this sinister plot. The kidnapper's motives were shrouded in mystery, but one thing was clear: he had deliberately split Phyllis from Sharon, creating a wedge between two women who were both integral to his broader, nefarious plan. Nick's mind churned with questions as he followed the cryptic clues. Why had the kidnapper chosen to isolate Phyllis from Sharon? Was it a calculated move to manipulate their emotions, or perhaps a twisted strategy to control the flow of information? Every step Nick took was laden with urgency. He knew that every minute spent searching could mean another minute of suffering for Phyllis. His resolve was unyielding. He would not allow the darkness to consume yet another innocent soul. As Nick navigated the claustrophobic hallways, the tension escalated. He could almost hear the whispered pleas of Phyllis echoing in his ears, urging him onward. His heart ached at the thought of her terror, a terror that mirrored his own as he recalled every instance of chaos that had marred her past. It was in these moments that Nick vowed, with unwavering determination, to ensure that she would no longer be a pawn in the kidnapper's cruel game. Back in the stifling room, Phyllis fought her inner turmoil. Every fiber of her being screamed for liberation, yet the oppressive darkness seemed to mock her attempts at rebellion. Determined to break free, she began to muster all the courage she could find, pushing against the psychological barriers that had confined her for far too long. In that moment of defiance, a spark of resilience ignited within her, a realization that her fate was not sealed by the actions of her captor. She could, somehow, reclaim her narrative, reshape her destiny, even if it meant navigating through an overwhelming maze of terror and uncertainty. Unbeknownst to Phyllis, the kidnapper was orchestrating every move from the shadows. His motives were inscrutable, his methods calculated to sow discord and heighten the stakes. The strategic division between Phyllis and Sharon was no random act, it was a deliberate ploy to fracture alliances and instill fear. The kidnapper had embedded a trail of critical data within the envelope Nick now held, a series of coordinates, a date, a time, all pieces of a puzzle that would, in theory, lead to the resolution of his twisted scheme. Yet, the real question lingered: what was the endgame of this orchestrated chaos? And how far was he willing to go to achieve it? The plot thickened further when, after successfully locating Phyllis, Nick realized that Sharon was nowhere to be found. A wave of frustration crashed over him as he pieced together the kidnapper's intention. The separation was calculated not just to disorient, but to incite conflict and emotional pain. As Nick secured Phyllis in a safer location, he was bombarded with the understanding that time was slipping away. Sharon's whereabouts remained an ominous void in the otherwise grim tapestry of events. Meanwhile, a storm was brewing among the remaining players in this dangerous game. Mariah, a woman with her own brand of ruthless determination, seethed with anger upon learning that Nick had managed to rescue Phyllis but had yet to locate Sharon. In a scathing outburst, Mariah declared that Sharon was far more expendable than Phyllis, a sentiment that sent shockwaves through everyone present. "She deserves to die," Mariah spat, her voice dripping with venom, while Phyllis, of all people, should be spared. Her words were not merely an expression of frustration, they were a manifestation of deep-seated animosity, a twisted justification for the harsh measures she was willing to endorse. The tension in the room was palpable as Summer, who had long harbored conflicting loyalties, reacted with unbridled fury. The charged atmosphere quickly devolved into chaos as Summer lunged forward, initiating a fierce struggle with Mariah. The clash was not just physical, it was emblematic of the broader battle raging behind the scenes, a clash of ideologies and personal vendettas that had been simmering for years. In that heated moment, the divide between allies and enemies blurred, leaving everyone to grapple with the messy realities of betrayal, manipulation, and raw human emotion. As the struggle between Mariah and Summer escalated, Nick's mind raced through the implications of every decision, every piece of data that had led him to Phyllis. The envelope, now a symbol of both hope and peril, contained clues that were as much a roadmap to Sharon as they were a warning of the dangerous undercurrents that threatened to engulf them all. The kidnapper's game was intricate and multi-layered, designed to pit friends against each other and force a reckoning with the dark truths hidden beneath layers of deceit. In the midst of the turmoil, Phyllis found herself at a crossroads. With every agonizing minute spent in captivity, she was forced to confront the demons of her past, the abuse, the neglect, the chaos that had defined her existence. Yet, in that crucible of despair, she also discovered an unexpected reservoir of inner strength. The realization dawned upon her, while the world outside might be marred by cruelty and treachery, her will to survive and reclaim her freedom was unassailable. Even as the oppressive walls closed in around her, Phyllis resolved that she would not be defined solely by the suffering inflicted upon her. Her spirit, though battered, was far from broken. Nick, fueled by both professional resolve and personal empathy, pressed on with renewed vigor. The data pointed him towards a hidden compartment in a forgotten wing of the mansion, a place where the kidnapper's machinations might finally unravel. Each step through the eerie, deserted corridors brought him closer to Sharon, whose absence was a constant reminder of the stakes at hand. The mansion, with its labyrinthine passages and ghostly echoes, became a silent witness to the unfolding drama, a place where every creak of the floorboards held a secret, every shadow hinted at lurking danger. Meanwhile, the internal battle among the remaining conspirators mirrored the physical struggles occurring within the mansion's walls. Mariah and Summer's confrontation escalated into a full-blown altercation, drawing the attention of everyone in the vicinity. Their clash was not only a release of pent-up emotions but also a desperate attempt to assert control over a situation spiraling out of their grasp. In the heat of their struggle, long-held grievances and hidden agendas were laid bare, further complicating an already volatile scenario. As the night deepened, the kidnapper's influence became ever more evident. His carefully orchestrated plan was unfolding with a precision that left little room for error. The division between Phyllis and Sharon was more than a tactic, it was a statement of power, a deliberate manipulation of the bonds that had once seemed unbreakable. The questions that haunted Nick were many. How far would the kidnapper go to ensure his plan succeeded? What personal vendettas fueled his actions? And most importantly, could he rescue Sharon before the situation spiraled into irreparable tragedy? In the final moments of that harrowing night, as the mansion's corridors echoed with the sounds of conflict and desperation, each character was forced to confront the harsh reality of their interconnected fates. Phyllis, though shaken and terrified, clung to a flicker of hope. Nick, determined yet burdened by the weight of every choice, continued his relentless pursuit. And amid the chaos, Mariah and Summer's bitter confrontation underscored the cost of betrayal. A cost measured not just in lives, but in the very essence of trust and loyalty. This night, etched in the annals of their turbulent lives, was a turning point, a moment when the boundaries between victim and aggressor, friend and foe, blurred into an intricate tapestry of emotion, duty, and survival. In the darkness of that forgotten room and the labyrinth beyond, each character was left to wonder. In a world rife with manipulation and despair, could the bonds of human resilience and compassion ultimately prevail, or would the shadows of their past forever dictate the course of their destinies? This narrative integrates all the given details: Phyllis's initial panic and her struggle against claustrophobia, the strategic separation of Phyllis and Sharon by the kidnapper, the critical data that leads Nick to Phyllis, and the explosive confrontation between Mariah and Summer over Sharon's fate. The story is designed to be both engaging and expansive, drawing the reader into the tense, layered world of intrigue, personal torment, and fierce determination. Phyllis lay on a cold, narrow hospital bed in a dimly lit room at Genoa's only public medical center. Her once commanding presence had been reduced to a state of utter vulnerability, a state that chilled everyone who witnessed it. The room itself bore silent testimony to the turmoil that had overtaken her. Bandages and gauze were haphazardly wrapped around numerous self-inflicted wounds, each one a painful reminder of a mind caught in a relentless spiral of despair. Her eyes, once sharp and calculating, now flickered with a disoriented light, lost in a haze that obscured her true self. This deteriorating condition was precisely the scenario that haunted those who knew her, a delicate soul pushed to the brink, teetering between life and a deepening mental instability. For years, Phyllis had managed the unpredictable pressures of a turbulent existence with a blend of determination and cunning. Yet, even the strongest can shatter under the weight of accumulated trauma. The scars on her body, inflicted by her own desperate hands, were evidence of a mind that had turned against itself. With every passing day, her physical and emotional state worsened. The doctors spoke in hushed, urgent tones about the seriousness of her condition, remarking that the combination of severe self-harm and a declining psychological state posed a risk not only to her life but also to the precarious balance of her relationships with those around her. This grim scenario was not only alarming on a personal level but also threatening to the broader narrative of Genoa City, a city already saturated with intrigue, scandal, and the occasional tragedy. Genoa was known for its convoluted storylines and high-stakes drama, yet even its fervent inhabitants were beginning to question whether adding another character with acute mental instability would serve the narrative or simply turn the story into a tedious repetition of familiar patterns. There was a whispered consensus among some insiders: if Phyllis's plight turned into just another case of a troubled mind succumbing to despair, it would render the storyline redundant and uninspiring. Instead, the city's residents craved fresh, unexpected twists that challenged their perceptions and kept them riveted. Amid this backdrop of medical crisis and narrative fatigue, another mystery gnawed at the minds of those entangled in these events. Sharon, forever the perennial victim, had once again vanished from the public eye. Time and time again, she found herself at the center of high-profile kidnappings and schemes, as if fate itself had marked her for suffering. This recurring pattern was a source of both outrage and sorrow among those who cared about her. "Where is Sharon?" became a question muttered in darkened hallways and whispered in anxious tones over cups of coffee. Her repeated abductions were not mere coincidences. They had evolved into a sinister hallmark of Genoa's criminal underworld. A few weeks earlier, amid the chaos that had enveloped the lives of those closest to Phyllis and Sharon, Nick had discovered a cryptic set of data left by the elusive mastermind behind the kidnappings. His investigation revealed a chilling plan. The orchestrator had intentionally separated Phyllis and Sharon, ensuring that their vulnerabilities would be exploited to the fullest extent. While Nick managed to track down Phyllis and bring her into a fragile safe haven, even if only temporarily, Sharon had disappeared without a trace. The fact that Sharon continued to be the focal point of these sinister acts raised burning questions. Why did she always end up as the primary target? What made her so uniquely susceptible to these devious schemes? Frustration and despair had begun to manifest among those close to Sharon. A common sentiment echoed through whispered conversations and heated debates: Sharon deserved to be protected, not exploited. Why is it that she is constantly thrust into harm's way? Questioned some of her most loyal allies. They argued that it was high time someone ensured that Sharon's safety was prioritized above all else. With every kidnapping, every heart-wrenching ordeal, the city's denizens grew more and more determined that no one, no matter how cunning or vicious, should be allowed to violate her space again. The idea of securing her with an impenetrable layer of protection was not just a logistical challenge. It had become a rallying cry for those who believed that every victim deserved dignity, security, and respect. In response to these growing outcries, a clandestine meeting was held in a discreet, upscale apartment far from the prying eyes of the media. A group of influential figures, friends, confidants, and allies of Sharon, convened with a singular purpose: to develop a comprehensive plan to ensure her protection. Among them was a renowned security expert known for his meticulous attention to detail, as well as a former intelligence officer whose experience in high-risk scenarios was legendary. Their discussions were fraught with tension as they reviewed the past events, debated the recurring vulnerabilities that left Sharon exposed, and painstakingly designed protocols that could offer her the sanctuary she so desperately needed. Yet, even as these plans took shape, an unsettling irony loomed over Genoa City. While Sharon was being discussed in terms of enhanced security, Phyllis's state of affairs was spiraling into a maelstrom of despair. The very elements that made her a compelling character, a tortured past, moments of unpredictable brilliance, and the scars of a hard-fought life, were now being overshadowed by the visible signs of self-destruction. Each bandage, each fresh wound, was a silent scream for help. And yet, the public discourse around Phyllis was ambivalent. There was empathy, of course, but also a nagging fear that her tragic arc might become just another tired trope, a predictable descent into madness that added little new to Genoa's already overcrowded narrative of suffering and redemption. Nick, driven by his unwavering resolve and the sting of failure at not having found Sharon yet, became increasingly obsessed with uncovering the truth behind the orchestrator's machinations. His investigation revealed a labyrinth of motives, personal vendettas, hidden alliances, and long-buried secrets that connected some of the city's most powerful families to the ongoing series of abductions. The mastermind's strategy was not merely to inflict pain on isolated individuals, but to weave a tapestry of chaos that would unsettle the very foundations of Genoa's society. It was a plan that thrived on division, splitting apart allies, pitting loved ones against each other, and exploiting the very weaknesses that each victim harbored. As Nick delved deeper into this shadowy conspiracy, he discovered disturbing parallels between Phyllis's recent decline and the orchestrated nature of Sharon's repeated victimization. The mastermind had exploited vulnerabilities that were deeply personal, turning them into instruments of manipulation and control. It became evident that the orchestrator's endgame was not simply the satisfaction of a twisted desire for power, but a calculated effort to destabilize the entire network of relationships that held the community together. Each abduction, each act of violence, was a meticulously planned move in a grand chess game, a game in which the stakes were nothing less than the very soul of Genoa City. Yet even as the storm of suspicion and intrigue built around both Phyllis and Sharon, there was a glimmer of hope. In the quiet moments between crises, Nick found solace in the belief that every piece of this convoluted puzzle, no matter how dark or seemingly insurmountable, could eventually be put together. His relentless pursuit of truth was fueled by a deep-seated conviction that, once all the pieces fell into place, the city would finally see a shift, a move away from the cycles of exploitation and despair that had long defined its troubled narrative. The dichotomy between Phyllis's physical and mental deterioration and Sharon's recurring victimhood was a constant source of tension. Where Phyllis's plight elicited a mix of pity and apprehension, Sharon's experiences ignited a fierce protective instinct among her supporters. The debate raged in hushed tones at cocktail parties and in the echoing corridors of Genoa's grand estates. Could the same forces that had driven Phyllis to self-destruction be prevented from consuming Sharon? And if so, what radical measures would be necessary to ensure that Sharon was no longer an unwitting pawn in a twisted game of power and manipulation? In a city that had become synonymous with dramatic twists and heart-wrenching tragedies, the answers were elusive. Yet, as the night wore on and the city's underbelly stirred with fresh whispers of conspiracy, one thing was clear: both Phyllis and Sharon were more than mere characters in a narrative. They were symbols of the resilience and vulnerability inherent in the human spirit.